Thank you for this. I'm not a doctor, by the way. I'm engineer, or used to be engineer. So, okay, so we are there. So, my talk was titled here, Evolution of Sentinel Missions, but before I come a bit into that, I would rather like to explain a bit as well about the overall framework where all this happens and what needs to be in place and what needs to be done still to hopefully have all these wonderful missions in the midterm future. So I start here with some policy statements from the Commission. So this is part of the new space policy. So you know that there is a new phase or a new framework for the EU budget and the EU policies coming up. So starting in 2021 and going up to 2027. So these 6 areas here are basically sort of what the Commission considers drivers to the space policy in general. So you can see there are a number of things which have been which I've just heard about by the previous speaker. So there's climate change, there's disasters, weather-related challenges, and so on. There's different sectors, for instance, to support maritime sector and so on. So there are lots of connections actually to the Copernicus service, in particular the Copernicus Marine Environment Service. So that's very important, and the European Union or the member states of the European Union consider, of course, the space policy as a tool to help them to provide progress in all these different policy areas. No? What is different now with this space policy to the one we had before? The most visible difference is that a number of programs, space programs, have been merged into one. So this means that there's one single program now here for the space policy. So there's satellite navigation, there's Earth observation, there's communication, and what's called space traffic management now. So basically to monitor debris and to help safe operation of space assets. What is the main objectives of this space program? Of course, we have already done lots of significant investments in the past, so we would first of all like to provide continuity to capitalize on these investments. Of course, these programs have been designed in the past, so the needs evolve, the requirements evolve, and so, of course, the services and the program as a whole will have to evolve in order to respond to these emerging needs. There's a number of factors changing in our overall surroundings here in the space sector. So there are these new space actors, so a number of private companies providing Earth observation, for instance, providing access to space, providing some kinds of observation or experiment capacity in space. So there's lots of stuff going on, which we will need to relate in one way or the other with this. So this is an overview of this what I just explained, the space program. So there are these 4 components which I already mentioned. There's a number of what's called here horizontal activities, and what is interesting for us here for the Copernicus program is of course the column there which indicates the Commission's proposal for the funding for the different programs, and you can see there that the Copernicus program as a whole is supposed to be funded with 5.8 billion. So now this is the Commission's proposal. So the Commission proposes and the Council and Parliament dispose. No? So at the end it's the legislator who will decide exactly which amount will be associated to this program and to the Copernicus component. So this is the best figure we have at the moment, but it can still change due to political developments. So what is in the evolution? So talking about the Copernicus part here, these are elements which are mainly taken from the space strategy for Europe. So this is a document which sets out a bit the future for the next decade or so. What potentially are the interests and what are the objectives and goals of the space policy for the future. So there's very prominently CO2 emission monitoring. So previous speaker has already indicated a bit that there are quite a number of elements in the marine environment service which contribute and link directly to this. There is specific focus on agriculture, so this is really seen more in a way to support the European Common Agriculture Policy, of course. But there we see as well immediately Arctic and polar areas, so this is something very close to the marine service here. So here clearly the climate change leads to a number of different conditions in the Arctic. So for instance, transport is expected to increase, exploration, the pressure on the natural resources and the natural ecosystems is going to increase. So there are a number of changes and things which we would count on the specifically here on the marine service to help us with in the future. So there's security needs. I think well, there's as well linked to the Arctic there, but I will not go into detail on that one here. Now I promised to come a bit at least to the satellites as well. So here is basically the existing missions and satellites. So we have the Sentinel for the radar, we have high resolution optical, we have medium resolution optical with a more or less daily revisit by now. We have the spectroscopic observations for the atmosphere and some altimetry. So in the midterm for the next funding period, we would of course expect that we will start the development for the next generation for the Sentinels here 1, 2 and 3. Because these are going in pairs, so the first pair is basically operating at the moment. The second pair of these satellites is expected to be launched in the early years of the next decade, so 2022, 3, 4, something like that, depending a bit on the specific missions. And so by end of the decade, we will need again the next set of satellites. And of course, if we want in 2030 or 2028 a satellite available, we need to start basically now to think about it and to start to develop these elements. So this is basically an evolution, more or less, of the, or it's what we call enhanced continuity. So we try to improve the things a bit, but it's basically the same type of observations as we have them now. So now there's as well, to respond to the enhanced requirements, there's as well a number of things we are considering at the moment to complement and to add really new observation types. No? So basically is what I explained before. The next generation will continue more or less the existing observation classes, I would say. And here we're talking about new instruments, new types of observations. So there is, first of all, there is the CO2 monitoring. So that's a spectroscopic instrument dedicated for the detection of total column for CO2 and methane, basically. If I now continue downwards, so there's of course ice mapping. There's an ice mapping mission proposed. There's a passive microwave interferometer for the more operational needs of the oceans. Now going to the right column, there's infrared observation, basically to complement the Sentinel-2 observations in this band, which is interesting for agriculture. There's a hyperspectral mission, and finally there's an L-band mission proposed for a number of soil moisture, but as well Arctic applications, ice-related applications. So all these missions are at the moment, as it's written there, candidate missions. So there's no firm decision taken to implement them. That's a proposal, which will depend at the end. So let's see how this. Excuse me. Yes. So this is basically a summary of the things which I just said. So this means that the implementation of this proposal will depend largely on the funds, which I explained in the beginning. So if we can get these funds we asked for, or maybe even a bit more, in order to be able to do all of this. So this is a complete wish list. This program is partly financed as well through the European Space Agency. So they have ministries, Council of Ministries, where they ask for funding for the ESA part of the program. So this is first of these ministerial conferences is the end of this year. So we will see how this goes and how much funding ESA, our partner ESA, can mobilize for that. So all this is conditional to the fact that there is still sufficiently funding being done. So this leads to the fact that for the time being, while the phases A and B1 for this studies for these missions are ongoing, I think I should accelerate a bit. These are coming to an end, so there will be a new procurement activity in the second half of this year. Basically preparing phases B2, CD, and E1 of these candidate missions. And due to the funding situation, as I just explained, all these missions will have a contractual breakpoint at the end of the phase B2. This means that at that point we will have to decide, exactly, we will have to decide if we continue or if we don't continue. So that's quite considered. And then later on, the procurement of recurring units through the European Commission is going to be decided upon through contract change notices of these existing contracts. So maybe I skip this one. This is something I more or less explained as well already. So yes, I stop here. I hope. Yeah.